Would you mind taking a few minutes and talking to us about your wonderful teacher and mentor, Hans Hofmann?
Well, Hofmann was and still is a big influence on me, in the sense that he was the first person who made a convincing case for the artist as a cultural figure, as somebody who's to be taken seriously, not just as a decorator or a creator of expensive objects for people with disposable incomes, but as somebody who, in a visual sense, embodies the moment, the cultural moment in which he's working. And so he thought that to be an artist was a calling. It was not just a profession, but it was like being a priest or a monk. It was something that you had to feel had some kind of inner significance and cultural significance. And so as a result of that, not only I, but most of his students took this idea of being artists very seriously. And it was a very good moment in which to do that, because it was the moment in which the first generation abstract expressionists kind of held sway. And there were these rather remarkable and admirable figures like Bill de Kooning and Franz Klein and Mark Rothko and Jackson Pollock, who were on the scene and very available, because they hadn't become historical figures, so you could go out drinking beer with them, you know, even though you were just a young artist fresh out of art school. You know. And so me and my group, we were like the very easy transition from these older and more philosophically inclined artists to what was going on in my generation.
Do you recall how you and Hofmann first met?
Well, I met him by going to his school, and everybody told me that the only game in town was Hans Hofmann.
And you ended up being his studio assistant, didn't you, Wolf?
Well, that happened after I studied. I was his monitor in the school. The monitor is the person who sweeps up the mess after the class and sets up the easels and so forth. But I became much more than that. I lived with Hofmann in the summer in Provincetown, and I was able to translate his English into language that people could understand, because he'd say things, "This painting is too bunt," and people would look at each other and they say, "What does he mean by that?" And I'd say, well, bunt is a German word for which no English exists, which means disorganized color, like Joseph and the bunte coat, you know, and or bright color, and you know. So and when Hofmann was lacking a certain English word, sometimes he'd turn to me and I'd tell him, because I knew German well and I was my mother tongue, you know. He never had any children. And his wife, Meets, was a wonderful woman. And Hofmann had his house, the interior of his house was all painted on white plaster with Winsor Newton paints dissolved in turpentine. We had to put it on with a sponge, you know, be very careful not to make a mess. And so forth. And Meets and Hofmann used to have terrible fights over what color should go into the stairwell and so on. And when Hoffmann's back was turned, Meets would say, "Come, make that cadmium yellow lemon." You know? So we'd paint the whole stairwell cadmium yellow lemon, and Hofmann would come home for lunch and see this, and he'd look at his wife and say, "Meets, you are a rat of a woman."
Who were the other students, your colleagues, at the same time that you were in the Hofmann School?
Larry Rivers, Joan Mitchell, Resica, Jane Wilson, whole lot of people, George McNeil.
Sure.
You know, I mean, all kinds of people that, some of whom, Paul Georges, some of whom became quite well known. You know.
Yes.
And the people who'd been there earlier, whom I didn't know because I was only there from 1947 on, they some of those became even better known than these guys. So I felt that I'm sort of the resident Hoffman expert. But on the other hand, there's another guy who also studied with Hoffman named James Gahagan, who I think died.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And he thinks he's the resident Hoffman expert. But for a while, he made Hoffman into some sort of an academic, which he certainly was not. And I wrote an article about for Art in America on Hoffman. I said, Hans Hoffman's contradictory messages. You know, and I said about Hoffman that he was like the Bible. You feel that Jesus wants his followers to live a decent life. Hoffman wants his students to be decent artists, you know. And he managed somehow to bring this message to life. Like one day he'd say expressionism is a terrible thing, and the dirty word, you know. He'd look at somebody's painting and say, it's too expressionistic, you know. And then the next day he'd say expressionism is the healthiest movement of the 20th century, and things like that, you know. But he was also a phenomenal person. He was a very many-sided, many-faceted man.
We are doing a Hans Hoffman show here at the gallery next spring.
Good.
And the title of the show is Artist, Teacher, Legend.
Good. Good title. Yeah, and I don't mind being part of, you know, the promulgator of the legend. Because I really think he deserves it, you know, because he was an extraordinary, unusual personality. He also was very, very funny, and he claimed that he was deaf, you know, and then somebody in the class would ask him for a scholarship. You know, they broke, they needed, and Hoffman would bend his ear and says, I don't hear. Special today, bad. Another day, maybe I hear. And then some girl would say, way off in a corner of the school, she'd say, you know, the thing about Hoffman is he's a very sexy guy. He'd smile and look in her direction, you know. So he was, you know, he was not a plaster saint by any means.
Let's talk a little bit, Wolf, about the early years when you left New York and the Hoffman School and headed to the University of Chicago.
Well, I went to the University of Chicago because Hoffman. I was starting to really get very nutty about being a young artist. I took everything much too seriously, much too literally. I said to Hoffman, should I go to college? Because I'm getting so neurotic over this art thing. And Hoffman said, that is a good idea because you are suffering from mental indigestion.
As I started my artistic career only 4 years ago. Not as a teacher, but as I used to as a teacher by reading his books and looking at his paintings and coming here to Melberg Gallery and really studying them and seeing the paintings, seeing the layers of different colors. He loves color so very much. And you can see that in this exhibition. Right on through the years, even as he started, he just loved color, playing with color. Although he may have done it in a more of an abstract, expressionistic manner in his early years as he experimented. And then he controlled that into something, into his own style that he solidified in the years after that. He still used that vibrant color, that punch that we love so much.